Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you guys are having a wonderful day today. This is OSK, and today I'd want to step away from the traditional guides I put out, and I want to discuss what I'm seeing out in the field for Spellbreak. I tend to hang out in the solo lobbies, and I encounter a lot of new players and some not so new players that make all the same mistakes in their gameplay. Mistakes that make my life as a veteran toxicologist very easy. Now, this is not to bash on new players or players that make mistakes in their gameplay. I do that myself. Rather, this is a video compiling the top 5 mistakes that I see in my games that can be improved upon to make your games easier and my life harder. Keep in mind this is a list full of opinions, and some things in this game are more nuanced than others, so if you disagree or have any other suggestions, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, thanks for all the love on the previous video for my compilation of all the elemental interactions in Spellbreak. I know I missed a few, you guys were still great nonetheless, and I'm glad you liked the video. Also, thank you for your patience, as I am just coming out of a cold and my voice is finally somewhat back in working order, so hooray for that, we can start creating content again. And now, without further delay, here are my top 5 mistakes that I see players make in the Spellbreak closed beta. The first mistake I want to address is very simple, and it's something that can be fixed very easily when you first drop in the game. I'm of course talking about trying to take fights while you're under-equipped. Usually what I see when I drop into a game are either players going directly into a large fight or onto a mana vault to try and get that legendary loot. This often leaves the player under-equipped and understated, resulting in an easy kill for better equipped players and veterans alike. The same goes with a particularly thirsty player going for a cheeky third-party attempt. This is a pretty common tendency among multiple battle royales, however Spellbreak in particular is very punishing when it comes to being under-equipped. Unlike shooter battle royales, Spellbreak plays more like a MOBA or an MMO type of game where gear and stats are very important when it comes to dealing and tanking damage. The lower the rarity of your items, the lower your chances are of coming out of a fight alive. The best example of this is fighting an enemy with a legendary belt when you only have a green or uncommon belt. The difference in fully restored armor there is 90 to 60, meaning that basically the enemy can tank a whole nother fireball you send their way, and they can land one less hit on you until you're exiled from the Hollowlands. This also plays into your skills for your classes. Skills are gained by entering the next circle in a game, and I'll use the Toxicologist class as an example. The first skill in the Toxicologist class is Vanishing Mists, which lets the player enter their own toxic cloud and dash forward while becoming invisible for a few seconds. This skill is so essential to the functionality of the Toxicologist class that I will often either prolong a fight I can't win immediately or avoid fights altogether until I have it unlocked, because it's just that essential to the playstyle. Thankfully, there's an easy way to counter this mistake, and that is to simply spend a longer amount of time looting to get fully geared before you engage in fighting. Part of this is simply avoiding areas you think a lot of players will go, and simply using game audio to avoid fights already happening if you're not fully geared. Typically what I recommend you have before you start fighting is a good belt, a good rune, and a rare or blue gauntlet or better. This should give you a good source of tankiness and health, a good source of movement, and a good source of damage. These 3 things should give you a decent starting point for your engagements, and of course a little extra gear never hurts, like boots and amulets and potions, you get the gist. The key point here is to make sure you're well equipped before you start taking fights. Mistake number 2 is one of the more nuanced aspects of Spellbreak, and that is insufficient mana use. Now, what do I mean by this? Essentially, you want to make sure that you're only using your mana when you need to during fights, and you're doing your best not to waste it. For example, let's say you're in the middle of a fight with a Stone Shaper and he's just slamming the dirt out of the ground to try and end the fight quickly. Obviously, you don't want to be anywhere near the ground, so you start levitating and raining down spells on him. You'll notice that if you're not careful, you'll quickly exhaust your mana, fall back to the ground to recharge it, and either have to use a rune or take a lot of damage. You typically want to avoid that kind of thing, and normally what I see a lot with newer players especially is levitating for far too long in a way that doesn't really help them, and spamming spells way too often. These are both very easy ways to make sure you have no way to counterattack your enemy and leave you open to being exiled. Now, I'm of the mind that there isn't a single video in the world that will truly prepare you for how exactly to use your mana in a way that you'll fully understand the nuance of when to use a spell, when to levitate, and when to just let your mana recharge, or any of that. A lot of it is simply learned through playing the game and developing your own understanding of it. With that being said, I'll give you a few tips that I use to help avoid running completely out of mana at the worst times. Tip number 1 is to make sure to space out your shots. This will allow your mana time to recharge and provide you with more firepower over time, and it also makes sure you focus on the shots you know you can hit. Tip number 2 is actually to use your levitate ability very sparingly when in a fight, unless it's absolutely necessary to get to a higher platform without using a rune. I typically only use levitate to chase enemies when they try to run away, which you shouldn't be running by the way, or if I'm out of runes and need to dodge an incoming spell. Levitating is an easy way for you to burn through your mana very quickly, and using a spell while doing it is definitely a good way to leave you with 0 mana. Therefore, I typically don't levitate during fights unless I know it's absolutely worth it. Again, you'll learn when it's worth it and when it's not by playing the game in your own way. Tip number 3 is more to do if you're out of mana or if you're low and need to recharge it while still dealing damage, and that's where sorceries come in. I'm a big fan of using the good old mana efficient sorcery. Sorceries do not cost mana and work on a cooldown system, so using them while you're trying to let your mana recharge can sometimes be a good idea to keep up the pressure in a fight. Anyway, like I said, this mistake that newer players make definitely is very nuanced, but there's also a very wrong way of doing it, so make sure to space out your shots and preserve your mana when you can during your fights. The third mistake I often see is extremely important and often what determines who wins and who loses in a fight. The mistake is not playing towards your opponent's weaknesses. Given this is a mistake that newer players make very often, and it's one easily solved with a bit of experience and a small bit of knowledge gained from research and guide videos, which I do provide on this channel by the way. Typically what I see from new players is them firing a seemingly random barrage of spells at their opponent in the hopes that their sheer damage output will be enough to silence the threat. Sadly, my friends, this is SPELLBREAK, and there's a lot more to combat than just DPS checking. SPELLBREAK requires a bit of knowledge and proper practice to play well. Often what I also see players doing is not using the runes properly to counter their enemies and even using the wrong spells against the wrong classes. Let me give an example here. Let's say that you're playing against a Stone Shaper. Since Stone Shapers typically use stone, and stone often counters fire, you should probably think twice about using fire as your primary source of DPS in that fight, or use it in a way that the Stone Shaper can't counter. Stone users also can only use the primary spell directly on the ground, so another way to counter them would be to simply position yourself up on a cliff above the battlefield, or use Levitate or a rune to get above them and rain down spells from above. The inability to do this will often result in getting out DPS by your opponent or allowing your enemies to avoid damage as they counter your own playstyle. The easiest way to get better at this, like I said, to watch guides, read the wiki, or watch streamers to see how they play around different situations. I've actually had to do this myself as some playstyles are more difficult to play around as a toxicologist than others. I've actually started running wind as opposed to fire because I wanted a solid way to counter pyromancers and tempest players in the current meta. Wind can simply cut through fireballs and can more easily hit tempest players as they bounce around and try to shoot wind at you, so I now have wind in my left hand as opposed to fire now. All this in an effort to play towards my enemy's weaknesses, and I have seen tons of success with it. Do the same and you should see better results in your gameplay. Mistake number 4 that I often see is new players not comboing their sorceries properly. Commonly what I'll see with players that don't fully understand what sorceries do is treat them as ultimate abilities instead of an extra way to deal damage in a more effective and creative way. They also tend to not know what spell interactions can combo into their sorceries to make them more powerful, or even what each sorcery actually does. Sometimes I even see players just randomly throwing out toxic clouds with no follow-up or boulders into close terrain and damaging themselves. This often results in players missing their targets, not being efficient enough with their DPS, and even exiling themselves, none of which is a good result. Now, there's an easy way to fix this, and that is to simply hop into the practice mode and learn what sorceries do what and what combos into what. I actually have a pretty in-depth video on this channel that shows you just that. One of the most important sorcery interactions is to simply throw down a toxic cloud and burn it with a fireball. This creates a fairly large area of effect that has a lot of damage for a short time, is fairly easy to hit, and it does the same damage regardless of any gauntlet rarity or anything like that. It's a great combo to use in the early game when you're under-equipped and in a fight, in addition to other options you'll find in the top right of your screen. The final mistake I often see players make is more a mindset than a specific game mechanic I see in-game, and that is trying to run away in the middle of a fight, especially in solos. Oftentimes what I see is I'll chunk a newer player down to about half health really fast, as is often the case with running the Toxicologist class, and they will immediately turn around and try to run. The problem with this is that unless they have a really good rune for running away, like Flight or Teleport, it's very easy with many classes to chase them down and even still deal damage while they run, and they end up getting exiled anyway. Thus, essentially what happens when you try to run is you get damaged anyway and you end up dealing no damage back to the person chasing you. SPELLBREAK as a game is heavily geared to providing ways to move while also dealing damage, so running away is often not the best choice, with the rare exception in squads where you can rotate out and maybe get some healing done, but it can still be challenging to do. What often happens is a veteran will often enjoy the easy exile, you'll run into a third party and get exiled, or squads will notice that you're low and chase you down for the easy disruption. Now, there are ways ways to get around this, namely spending a little time in the practice mode and getting used to advanced movement to help make escaping easier, and learning how to properly rotate out with your squad to make healing possible. However, despite these two suggestions, you're still not very likely to completely escape the encounter with an enemy, so you'll likely only have time to quickly sip a potion behind small cover. An easy way to do this would be drop potting, where you start the potion immediately before you can descend down behind cover and heal that way, or you can actually display a bit of confidence and just try to fight your opponent back and outplay them. Against better opponents and veterans, you'll likely get exiled anyway, but being in the engagement can often result in some good practice and high level combat and leave you better prepared for the next game, or you may even end up exiling them instead of yourself, which would be an awesome turn of events. Either way, I wouldn't recommend running away from a fight unless you have squad mates to back you up, but even then it's often better just to fight it out. Alright everyone, that's going to do it for the video for today. Thank you all for watching all the way to the end, and I hope you learned something new or will use this as a way to improve your Spellbreak gameplay. Again, if you have any more mistakes to add or if you disagree with some I have here, please be sure to let me know in the comments below. And I'm sorry for being away from making videos for a while. I kind of got sick and my voice literally just would not work, so I hope you all understand and enjoy my silky, rough, smooth voice today. As always, if you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more content, follow the socials down in the description below. And that's going to do it for me today, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all out there.